RFK Jr. was also at the Libertarian Convention. I don't know if he was seeking their nomination as much as he was seeking their votes, but
and cameras
and whatnot. And this is coming on the heels of he obviously didn't vet his vice presidential nominee. That's fine. She has a lot of money, and that is really sort of like the primary thing that he needs to get on the ballot. And I think that he would also say his politics have definitely changed over the past 5 or 6 years, maybe a longer span. They have been evolving, but it's sad to see this dynamic play out where the idea of in a medical emergency, in a pandemic, for the sake of public health, people are required to wear masks when they enter into public places, let's say. Obviously not all of them, but some at the time, maybe even the majority. And where workers needed to be protected because they didn't have the option of walking into that restaurant if they wanted to eat. They needed to be there. To hear him equate that with slavery is a little bit disappointing.
Of 2020, I traveled, this was at the height of the pandemic, I traveled to Berlin to speak to a group of about 1.3 million people from all over Europe in a peaceful demonstration. And an NBC film crew came up to me during that convocation, and they asked me why I wasn't wearing a mask, which nobody was except for the NBC film crew. And they said, wasn't I scared of dying of COVID? And I said to them, there's a lot worse things than dying. And they said to me, like what? And I said, like living like a slave. Like having...
Thanks for the crowd shot.
Yes.
Like having my children grow up in an America where the Bill of Rights is just a empty piece of paper. In 1776...
Okay. I just, there may be people out there who don't realize this, but living like a slave was a lot more difficult than requirements that if you enter into certain places, you need to wear a mask, a cloth mask, during a pandemic, incidentally.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm not convinced.
It's a little bit difficult to... It's a little bit difficult to sort of like get more elaborate than that. But that's basically, there was a lot of things that slavery was, but really in no way is expressed in the idea of public health safety measures with masks. Now, one of the things that obviously is more like that we all go through in slavery is this whole thing where they can put signs up in stores saying no shirt, no shoes, no service. Wow. And of course, this is also
like the plantation.
It's like being a slave because you're forced to, when you go into like a place where there's food being served, to wear your shirt or your shoes.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's just like stepping on a sugar cane stalk that you just hack down. Exactly like that.
I also, I did a little Google search here. There were 38,000 people who took to the streets at that time in Germany, according to the BBC. Hundreds were arrested. And it was, outside. A court allowed it to go ahead. They did not want to wear masks, some of those people. Now, you know who else is wearing masks in some of these pictures? I see it looks like the police were actually wearing masks.
Also enslaved?
Enslaved as well, yes.
Clearly a very meaningful time for Bobby. I don't know if even anti-COVID or COVID conspiracy wackos remember that time where Bobby got asked a question about masks in German television. Like, who cares? What are you talking about?
It's all grievance.
He said Trump closed down 3.3 million businesses with no due process in violation of the Fifth Amendment with the lockdowns. And I'll just say, like, if you think that the problem with COVID is how many businesses weren't allowed to stay open at the height of a pandemic, and not that 1 million people died and we didn't expand public health in any meaningful way. In fact, like right now, Trump in the end of his speech said, we're not going to do any of that, like, global agreements about the next pandemic. That's where all the energy has gone, is to make sure that we can hoard vaccines the next time too.
100%. And the idea, like, what does keep your businesses open mean? It means forcing your workers to come into an environment where they are subjected to potentially a fatal virus, a disease. I mean, we don't have to speculate about this. You just need to look at the data and see who is it that had what cohorts had the highest rates of death. And it is always people at the lower end of the income spectrum, people from communities where they had to travel into these businesses that were deemed essential. And they end up catching COVID or giving it to someone in their family. I mean, this isn't speculation. Now, you may not believe the numbers. Maybe the numbers are forged. Maybe all the data is fake. And sometimes you need to argue that if you want to ignore all the data. But that's just the reality. I mean, I would say, and again, this is just sort of like my own observation, but the most amount of masks that we saw, like at the tail end of when people were wearing masks all around, in my estimation, were people who were coming from either immigrant or black neighborhoods where they had lost, and this is just New York, I should say, and in Brooklyn for that matter, where there's just a higher incidence of people dying.
Yeah, the dynamic of slavery wasn't like, someone in authority told you to do something that you really just don't want to do. Like, it's not like, when RFK puts his seatbelt on in the backseat of his limo, that's not like putting the shackles around your ankles, buddy. The problem with slavery was that their labor was exploited and their humanity was stripped from them to benefit capitalism, to benefit capitalists. And like, what is the more analogous situation here? I mean, again, it's not, I of course, you shouldn't go as far to say as like our minimum wage system is the same as slavery. It's not, that is not a good comparison to draw in that way. But in terms of people who are on the front lines of society who are being exploited for capitalism, it was the same people that were endangered by businesses getting reopened too soon because there weren't adequate protections for them. And that's why you saw outsized death and infection in people who were poor and people who were non-white in America.
How much of Bobby Kennedy's life has he spent working actually for somebody, like a boss?
Right.
Well, I mean, he worked for law firms and he worked for Pace University and whatnot. But I mean,
could walk away from those though.
I mean, for the most part. But the bottom line is, I'm sorry, wearing a mask is not even remotely being required to wear a mask. Obviously, he wasn't required to wear a mask. I mean, this is there's proof in the anecdote that it's not slavery, because had he done something, had he not worn a mask under a slavery regime, he would not be able to tell this camera crew about it as he's traveling freely to another country. He would be in the stockades, probably being whipped. Yeah. That's one indication that you're not a slave.
Yeah, slavery remains the best term to have set up a Google alert for at the Libertarian Convention.
Yeah, exactly.
Pan to an all-white audience, by the way.
A few guys standing up.
Hell yeah.
Wheezing, wonder what that's about.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.